Okay, all right, so this is the June GDK Community Office Hour, and let me share my screen real quick so we can go over the agenda. Give me a second. Find the button, there we go. So, yeah, while we're waiting for Ash to talk about the GDK survey, we'll cover the second topic first, which is some of the docs improvements that have been happening over the past several weeks. And let me share another window here. You guys can see this. Hey, Ash, how are you?
Hello, sorry I'm a bit late, everyone.
No, that's okay. You joined us in perfect time. So we got Rajendra and Lee on the call. Just went over the agenda, and what I'll do is quickly go over the second topic, some of the docs improvements that have been happening over the past several weeks, and then we can go back talking about the GDK survey. And Ash, I mean, feel free to add your thoughts here. I mean, I just did a quick query on documentation related MRs over the past several weeks. In particular, Evan did a lot of work, like restructuring. Let me find his MR here. This one in particular, where he did a lot of work restructuring the documentation to make it more readable. Just quickly show you the MR. I think this was merged like a few weeks ago, but I mean, there are a lot of changes here in one MR, you know, not just a README file, but several places he made a lot of great updates. And I think we're slowly but surely, we're making good progress in terms of how documentations are, I mean, not only up to date, but, you know, structured in a way that's a little bit more logical and flows better, I think. But Ash, do you want to add anything else here? But I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory in the MR, but.
Yeah, yeah, Evan's done some great work. He's currently the technical writer for the GDK, or at least the sort of official one. We are having a new technical writer become responsible, or primarily responsible, for the GDK in the not too distant future. But Evan's been doing an awesome job keeping on top of everything, and also yeah, proactively improving things. So yeah, I must admit, I wanted to spend a bit more time on the docs than I was able to, but we still definitely have you know, a lot of work to do around the install documentation. So whilst, you know, there were some great improvements around sort of the how-to section, which, you know, includes specific topics and how to you know, how to set them up and troubleshooting and things like that, but we still have a fairly you know, big task around improving the install. So it's currently 2 pages, which is the prepare stage, which is kind of installing all the dependent libraries and things, and then there's the setup, the GDK. So definitely that should be the next our sort of next aim, to improve those, even if it's just really small iterative improvements. But yeah, they're definitely too big. So looking to continue improving, especially with that area.
Yeah, and I think there's been a number of good community contribution as well.
Oh, absolutely,
like,
yeah.
One from like Ethan, and I think Lee, like for some reason I thought you had some.
Yeah, I've got 2 up at the moment. I thought this morning or this afternoon would be a good opportunity to give Ash a little nudge, actually, to see if they're such tiny little MRs that I don't see any reason not for us to sort of back and forth very quickly, just to confirm whether you're happy, whether you need any more tweaks, and get them merged in.
Right. Yeah, and then I think this is the one that you were talking about, the Windows 10.
This is the one, and then there was one again. I think it was Frank that helped suggest, or someone that suggested, that there was a little glitch where there was references to Go version 1.12 as well as 1.14. So I was trying to sort of consolidate, remove some of those references. Yeah, let me see if it hasn't
maybe.
got the right
Yeah, I'm
tag
wondering
in.
if that's under the main GitLab project versus GDK.
No, it's let me just see. It might not have any labels on it. It's only got the community contribution label on, unfortunately.
Okay.
But it is a docs update. I'll just at you on it if you're in.
Whoops.
All right.
Let me see.
Yeah, it's a challenging one to have documentation and like commands and things like that in sync. So that particular one, I remember reviewing it, and yeah, it's we update one area of the documentation to say the new sort of minimum Go version is 1.14, and then there was some areas that were left behind. Yeah, it'd be great to
have variables,
yeah, it'd be great. It's I'm experimenting with a system called ASDF, which can manage dependencies kind of separate from RBM and the individual tools, for example. And the way that works is that you kind of check in a file. It's called tools-version instead of like RBM version, for example, and you can have multiple sort of bits of software and the versions that you require. So we might be able to, if that works, ends up being something that's suitable for both, Mac, Linux, and even potentially Windows. We could, have that checked in, and then, maybe we do have some options in the documentation to kind of dynamically bring kind of logic in. We're not taking advantage of it currently because the main documents are in Markdown, but we can use ADoc, which is ASCII doc, and you can say, well, instead of hard coding the version of Go or of Ruby or whatever in the docs, you say sort of pull the contents of this file in, and that'll have all the versions. So that could be something that might be able to stop this from happening in the future.
Yeah, I must admit, when I've managed to get it installed on Windows 10, my temptation is to put the whole guide, exactly step by step what I've done into the documentation. But 85% of it is probably the same as the Ubuntu install or the any other install. So I don't kind of want to duplicate that and mean that there's even more to maintain. So it's a tough balance, I guess.
Yeah, but it's definitely appreciated, and I think it slipped off my radar because I didn't assign myself. But no excuse, I've just assigned myself now to the WSL one now.
Perfect. As I say, either feel free to, with the Go version one, just either get me to pop the version back in or pop it back in yourself and get it. I thought I'd rather it errored than installed, and then halfway down the line you get an error that you don't understand because you've got the wrong version.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just in the background going to find that one.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, lots of work. I mean, obviously to be done, like you're saying, Ash, but I was a lot of contribution both from the team members and the community members over the past several weeks. So getting pinged on a lot of MR stuff, but I'm not complaining. So cool. All right, so I think I'll add some notes under the docs improvements under the agenda, but Ash, I'll turn things back over to you. And if you want to tell us the latest on where things are with the survey.
Sure. Yeah, so just for some context, it started life as the GDK survey, and then it was a Google form, and then it sort of has now expanded out to being how does one contribute to GitLab? So not being GDK, not asking the question about how you use the GDK, but how do you contribute? So opening it up, widening the kind of question, and now it's in a different system. So it's dragged on a bit, I will say. It's definitely very close to being finished. I just am conscious of sending out something that doesn't ask the right questions, but it definitely asks more broader questions like, how do you use the GDK? Do you use review apps, which is another system we have that is very automated, and you don't need to clone anything locally. Or there's the GDK, the GitLab Compose Kit, which is another project. It's very Docker centric, and just trying to, I guess, get a better sense of how people both within GitLab and also the wider community, how people are using these various tools, and are there other ones that we don't know about, and what are the pain points, what are the good parts. Yeah, I can share, I'm happy to share a little bit. There's nothing,
yeah.
I think sort of nothing to not show. I'll just bring it up and then share. So it's in a system called Qualtrics, which has the ability to do, just logging in, more kind of advanced analysis over the results and things like that, and branching logic and things. So whereas Google Forms is a bit more sort of straightforward. Just doing all the logins. Okay, I'll just share my screen. So yes, it's marked as May 2020, so I've missed that by a little bit. But it's been great. We've had lots of, at this stage, just internal feedback upon the questions, and been, really trying to incorporate a lot of those. And there are some, sort of requirements around the types of questions we can't ask or that we should ask. And so they were sort of contributing to some of the, a bit of the delay. So the first question is, trying to get an understanding about the role in which the person filling out the form is. There's quite a few there, and it's an interesting tool. You can see the mobile kind of view. Hopefully everyone can see that, by the way. I didn't ask that.
Just about. You've obviously got a big old screen.
All right, I'll...
No, it's fine.
I'll see if I can get rid of some of these so they're a bit... Oops. Cool. Yeah, so there's your role. There's some great feedback by George. George, is it George, the community member?
Yeah, George.
Yeah, around the core team, around asking what country, which is great. We didn't really have that in, so I'm going to be a scientist for today. And yeah, just describing your role, team member. So we really want to try and have the same survey for everybody. So and that's presents a bit of a challenge in trying to make sure that all the different permutations of people's sort of demographic and how they operate are covered. So I'm going to be a team member. I think if you don't contribute to GitLab at this point, that's the end. And then, yeah, which frameworks, the GDK, the GCK, the Web IDE, I'm not sure, and review apps isn't in there. So it must have been deployed in this version that I'm previewing. Let's say the GDK, and depending on, this is a branching point here where it can asks you specific questions for, say, the GDK. I don't know if we can easily go back, which is a bit of a problem. I don't know. I haven't purposely left that off, but yeah, can't seem to go back. But I think this page here is very much similar for the GDK, GCK, or any other kind of local type development environment. So operating system, how much RAM, reason for that is try and get a better understanding about is the if there's some unhappiness around a particular framework, does that correlate to, say, 1 to 4 gig? Because that would be a really low recommendation, unfortunately. So yeah, we'll go 5 to 8. And what tools do you use for managing Ruby? And yeah, that's probably, I don't know if we have that on our agenda to discuss, but the Ruby version upgrade that happened a few weeks ago is probably a good one to chat about, and the implications there.
I had a few glitches while getting up the GDK.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah,
no problem.
I'll whip through this, and then we'll get to that, and maybe some hope for how that might be improved in the future. Yeah, so ASDF is interesting. It's it can offer some other benefits that we might realize in the future, but typically most people I think are RBM or RVM, but in this case you could choose multiple. There's no reason why you couldn't. How do you manage node? I think, yeah, for some people they use Homebrew, or depending on the state of the package manager, it could be fairly well behind, or but a lot of people use node-env. And then a grid around, I'm going to be very biased here. I'm very happy with everything. Clearly not. Reliability, let's have that as somewhat dissatisfied, because that's probably a fair judgment at this stage. And yeah, this is another interesting insight into this Qualtrics tool. It makes suggestions on how accessible the form is, how likely people are to choose various, answer various questions and things. And this is one that flagged as being not a very usable question, even though it offers it as a kind of, it's a ranking question. So how would you rank in order of things that could be improved? So installing, reducing the time, making it more reliable, and sort of dragging them into position. So it's I think there is value in having this sort of order ranking, but the way the tool implements it is a bit wonky, but we'll leave it at that. Some other information there you can offer, and that's the end for the GDK. And the GCK is similar, asking similar types of questions, but there's a bit of a more heavier sort of Docker perspective. So that's how it looks, and that will be how it goes out to folks. I believe we'll be aiming for a smaller set of people just early on to try and see if there's something really silly that we've overlooked, and then we'll send it out to the wider community and try and get some results, and probably leave it open for a month, and then use that in our decision making around how we spend the time on the GDK. Do we spend more time on improving the Windows documentation, Vagrant, all these things that we're learning that we probably don't spend enough time on, but be good to have some concrete data to back that up. So yeah, that's where that's heading. Any questions?
I missed that one actually, Ash. Was that one of the, now knowing you can't go back, was that one of the questions after you selected, did it give you an option where it said Windows, Linux? Was Vagrant an option? I didn't see anything.
I guess, yeah, interesting, because it isn't separated out, but I guess we could qualify. I think a lot of these are optional too, by the way. Which I mean,
really, go on.
Sorry, you go.
I think we really want to know who's using Vagrant, and also I suspect that there's a reasonable percentage who are using VMs of some sort, whether it be VMware or VirtualBox or I'm sure KVM. There's a lot of tools like that. So I don't know how easy it would be to ask that, but I think I'd be interested to know, like, okay, what's your actual native operating system you're running, and then are you running GDK on that, or not necessarily GDK, GCK? Is your development environment on that, on your host, or have you got a VM, and if so, what are you running on your VM? I know it's a lot more questions. I'm sure you can find a nice way of presenting it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so I mean, all of these you could run the GDK, the GCK under like a VM, especially for Windows. Oh, no, sorry, Docker's pretty reasonable on Windows these days. But both of these you could run, excuse me, in a VM. But yeah, the Vagrant one is interesting because again, you could run that in a VM. Do we break it out at this point to say? It really needs to be a question within, I think, deeper inside, say the GDK.
Yeah.
So you got Mac OS, Windows, Linux, and then like a question about, is it maybe even before that, like, is it virtualized? Is it native?
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, someone might answer and be like, "Oh yeah, I'm using Mac," and select that option and not even look any further to see that there's an option to say, "Oh, we're using Vagrant, and are you using Vagrant with Docker or Vagrant with VirtualBox, etc.?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, thank you. I think it's going to go prior to this one. And yeah, with most of the questions being optional, it's trying. I mean, the rationale behind that is to try and improve it. You know, people filling out the form, but it also means that we may get a lot of incomplete data. But that's, I think, the trade-off. We want people to not feel like they have to answer a question and be blocked and kind of walk away. But we'll just take any sort of any kind of input we can get. So that's a great suggestion, Lee. Thank you. I'll add that to the list.
No worries.
Yeah.
I think if we got it back and saw that 50% of people were using Windows 10, I'd be very sort of like intrigued and then be like, but how are they? How are they using it?
Yeah, you're right. For Windows, it definitely is. For Mac and Linux, you know, you lean very heavily on the native side because there are a lot more tools out there. But yeah, for Windows, you're exactly right. There are a lot of different methods, and probably the native would be the least of the methods that people are using. So
yeah, I don't know if this is no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to help. Like, because here when we say Mac, Windows, and Linux, because I was assuming these are all just native OS that I was assuming, and then if you're running on a VM of some sort, like Lee's saying, I wonder if that goes under other. I don't know if that simplifies things in terms of the structuring the survey, or.
Yeah, I mean, it's as it stands now. That would be. I guess it depends on how people decide to answer the question. They might say,
right.
Well, you know, I'm running Windows under like VMware, for example. I'll just put down Windows, but we are losing the bit of data there that it's virtualized. So yeah, I'll put some thought into that. That's a tricky one, but yeah, this is becoming quite an interesting sort of challenge.
You think it's a simple survey thing, and then it goes out of scope. Creep happens really easily. But
it's important to, I guess, we don't want to overwhelm people with too many of these surveys. So it's important to get it right and sort of just ask people, you know, periodically and ask the right question. So definitely appreciate that. That was a good suggestion.
And Ash, when you said, like, I mean, I think it makes sense to trial this out, like with limited people to get like initial feedback on the survey. Like, were you just thinking like GitLab team members only, or like would you be open to including some like select wider community members? Because I'm concerned that like we get like a skewed point of view just from the GitLab team members. But
yeah, I mean, that's yeah, if we can arrange it, that'd be awesome. It's certainly not for wanting to kind of keep it behind closed doors. It's just a case of just not annoying you know, others too much. But yeah, it definitely is. I think you're right. There's a potential there to have it skewed.
Cool. Yeah, let me know. Appreciate it.
Cool. All right. I'll stop sharing.
All right. Yeah, while we were talking, I just took some notes, some bullets under the issue for the call today. So if I miss anything, feel free to add or edit. And let's see, I guess moving along, we got a couple of issues that we have listed there, 750 and 947. I think these are following up on discussions from last month. How would we know when there are like a significant, like, you know, updates, like, you know, dependency issues like we're talking about earlier?
So that ties into the Ruby upgrade, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Ruby upgrade was a good example of how you know, when dependency changes are made kind of outside of the workflow or the sort of outside of GDK, because currently, just for some context, and apologies if everyone knows, that the GDK's Ruby version, when you install a fresh GDK by GDK init, or you clone the repository, there isn't actually a Ruby version as such at that point in time. What happens is it is brought in, it's symbolically linked as part of the install phase, and it takes the Ruby version that is currently residing inside the GitLab, the main GitLab project, and symlinks that in. So what happened was the Ruby version was bumped to 2.6.6, and it happened with 2.6.5, and it will probably happen with 2.6.7 if we're not quick enough about resolving this. Is that the dependency updated without the GDK being updated. So there's an implicit dependency. I think it's important to note that it is important to keep evolving with the Ruby versions, so that the GDK or the environment that the GDK is running in is as close as possible to how the stable versions of GitLab are deployed. So not just GitLab.com, but the latest stable, like 13.0, for example. I believe that's still 2.6.5. But yeah, it's important to be as close as possible development-wise with the production versions, possibly a little bit ahead. But yeah, so it happened pretty quickly without much ability for us to, well, we currently don't have a facility to, other than using the forums and the Gitter groups, the Gitter channels, to advise, that there has been a dependency, in this case, a dependency upgrade, but I think it still would have been a little too late at that point. So to sort of close the loop on it a little bit, maybe I'll just share my screen so we can point at that issue. Yeah, so this is the, allowing GDK update to display some sort of messaging pre and post. And so this is long before the Ruby issues, but as a way to give us the ability to communicate with those using the GDK. And so it wouldn't have necessarily solved the Ruby version bump, but we could have given at least some steps proactively, but it would have required like the GDK update command to be run again in order for us to feed that information out to say, unfortunately, there's been a Ruby version upgrade and it may cause issues. Here are the steps to overcome. But I think the original sort of use case for this sort of, the pre and the post were to make aware of new features, new options, and not so much like a kind of, there's like a warning or an alert, but that's certainly something we could use if we had this facility in place. But the root fix for the Ruby version bump is to disconnect the implicit dependency between GitLab and GDK Ruby version, which seems like a pretty straightforward fix, but I've been battling it for about a week now, trying to figure out some of the intricacies. But in the broad strokes, we're going to stop. So I'll just, for example, this is one of my GDKs. So if you look at the Ruby version, it's a symlink into GitLab. And so when you do a GDK update, even if we didn't bump the version of Ruby, that version comes from a GitLab, the GitLab project, which will be updated when you do a GDK update. So we'll be disconnecting that and making 2.6.6 still the standard version, but we will have greater control over how that's bumped, and we'll be very careful when it comes to the next bump to make sure that we have either the ability to detect and say, well, there's a new version, here are the steps you wish to migrate to that new version, or ideally even offer an automatic solution. So we're looking into, there's some other, I don't know if I've got the issues on the top of my head, but
sorry, Ash, I know I've read that issue, but remind me, were you thinking of that being sort of a manual process for sort of you guys or the community to sort of add these steps in to say, oh, if you're going from this version, here are the Sorry, I think I broke up a bit there.
That's right. I think I got the gist, but go. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, was it going to be a manual process, or are you hoping of some magical way to identify when versions are changing and dependencies and?
Yeah, so ideally an automatic solution where it's detected and encouraged, or at least like a system that says, or not a system, apologies, some sort of prompt to say that there has been a Ruby upgrade, or there's one coming. Here are some, because there's two ways to solve it. There, if we know we're going to bump the version in the future, we can offer steps to sort of prepare, because you can install a new version of Ruby and not make it the default, and prepare it so that when the version is bumped, it's already ready. But I think I'd prefer to have, as part of the GDK 8, we either offer the heads up, just informational, and then say that in a Ruby bump here, press enter, or do you wish to upgrade your Ruby? It's probably not really an option to say no, because that will break the GDK. But yeah, at this stage, we're looking to automate it as much as possible, and that's where the I don't know if I've got the branch here, but let me just see if I've got it.
Just trying to think how it could work, because it'd almost have to pull down the latest repo and then diff it with the version that you've currently got on your machine to work out what the changes are. And by that point, it's almost too late.
Yeah, I don't know if we discussed the implementation down here, but
I think actually that might even been what I asked by the looks of it. I can't remember now.
Yeah, you asked the question. This is where, and this kind of led to the investigation around ASDF support,
Right.
because it not only, this is just a work in progress merge request, but here you have this tool versions file, and you nominate all the different versions. And I don't know why I don't have this branch, but the idea is that, and this merge request goes a little bit further in trying to keep the ASDF install relative to the GDK, because part of the problem we have here is that Ruby upgrades and Ruby versions and things are sort of installed at a global level, and so we need to be careful how we kind of automatically upgrade Rubies for people and things like that. So with this approach, it's a shame I don't happen to have the I'm working the branch locally, because I can show you that it will install all the like Ruby, Golang, Node, all of these things. It installs it sitting under the GDK in the .asdf directory. So it means all the dependencies are self-contained within that GDK. They're not installed like in user local, or they're completely kind of contained. So it gives us greater control, or gives the GDK greater control and greater certainty around, if the versions of Ruby are upgraded, if the versions of Golang are upgraded, we can be fairly confident that we're not going to impact other things. It's just going to apply to that GDK. So yeah, it's working. I'm a bit uncertain about how to proceed with this, because yeah, I don't want to be, to say this is the only way you can install all these things, but it would make life a bit easier, if we say this is the recommended way, because ASDF, from what I understand, is cross-platform, and sort of can offer automation of these installs, which we still have the same problem of managing the version. So it's just substituting the Ruby version for tool version, but if I can get this branch, you simply run ASDF install, and that is, I don't think, yeah, it just goes and if it has everything installed, it's a no op and just continues on. So we could simply run this command after a GDK update, and that would go and install those versions and sort of do it automatically. So that's an option, but it's still early days. But definitely first step is to break out the Ruby version so that we don't have this kind of jarring experience that we unfortunately experienced recently. So yeah, and it's not just a Ruby problem; it's a version issue that although in the case of Ruby it is specific that we have that symlink, but with the problem would exist with Node if we bump the required version but don't bump the necessary files correctly. I think that would exhibit the same issues, but I like the idea of this single file that has all the dependencies, and this is what I was alluding to earlier. We could draw this file into the documentation and say, here are the versions, and they're, we don't have to repeat them. We just know that these are the versions we want.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah. So it's looking promising. I'm I don't want to be that person who introduces another system for doing things, but I think it does bring a lot of benefit, and I'm not only sort of including the versions file here, but some niceties around bootstrapping. So I'm experimenting with doing a lot of this stuff that's sort of part of the documentation already, like installing gems and having it just as much more automated, so that it's a bit of an easier sell to say, here is a new system called ASDF. Yes, I'm sorry, it's another one, but it will make things easier because it will be a protected install of all your system or your languages and things, and it'll be hopefully easier to upgrade going forward. Fingers crossed.
And I guess the benefit is you can still use this inside Vagrant and for all of the channels, hopefully, even though it's sort of another tool, it will operate across the board. Yeah,
it's still unfortunately for certain libraries and certain gems, there is a need for system system development libraries. So for Mac, like Homebrew is still required to install a bunch of things that ASDF currently doesn't do. It's the same with Linux. There are just some system library type things, and those will be susceptible, if they're upgraded outside of the, the sort of flow of ASDF or RBNV or whatever. So that's when things like GDK Doctor try and step in and offer, solutions and at least acknowledge or detect known issues, which, there's some good discussion around, that this is not really a 100% solvable challenge, this whole dependency kind of protection, and the only true way to do it is with VMs or Docker, but they aren't always an option for people. So in lieu of going all in on those technologies, we're sort of going with this approach, and I think it'll improve things, and it will at least make our documentation a bit more consolidated. So instead of saying RBNV or NodeEnv and all these alternatives, we'll just say this is the sort of recommended standard way of doing things, and you could do it with RBNV or sort of go your own way, but this sort of recommended way should be fewer steps, and we'll be able to better support it, I think, but we'll still continue to support the other methods, like having a Ruby version file checked in, etc. Conscious I'm talking a lot, sorry. So feel free to yell or ask questions.
Oh, that's cool. I look forward to next time I spin up a WSL/VM, being able to hopefully just run that.
And it's at the moment it's separated out from the like separate make file targets like Bootstrap and ASDF setup. So it's not in the sort of standard flow yet, but that's just to make it as an option right now. But if it gets reviewed, and
I think that the offer's always there, but if you're sort of at a stage where you want to sort of pilot it, so to speak, then give us a shout, and I'll happily give it a bash on WSL.
Cheers. I would love to know more about the Windows side of things and how it's improving. I think I always get your name wrong.
It's TI rather than TR. Don't know why I'm not coming up though.
Yeah. Is that?
I thought that was right, but strange.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's there's a few of these work in progress merge requests happening to try and probably just should focus on this one, because without this one here, if there's a bump to 267, for example, this will bite again. And I think there was a lot of, we have a GDK channel in Slack, and really common problem for people, and it was quite hard to watch because it's really hard seeing people being blocked and disrupted, not just GitLab people, but also the community engineers. It's not great. So yeah, it's definitely something we should get on with soon. And I think that was both of those. Yeah, so for sort of heads up type things, this might become less important, but I think it'll worth offering this sort of option, because we're adding new things all the time, and it's can be hard at times to see. I guess we could kind of think of this as like an ability to communicate the changelog or the concept of a changelog, but hopefully not to say we've made a mistake and here's how to get out of it. But yeah, that is one possibility.
Cool.
Yes, so I think that was that. There was another one linked off this. I don't know if it's worth discussing. Oh, it's been merged. I'll maybe put on the next meetups agenda around. There was another similar one to this one around kind of an interactive sort of approach more on the install side. So asking questions at install time, and instead of running GDK install and seeing some things are missing, and trying to be a bit more helpful. But maybe that's for next time.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the updates. Appreciate it. All right, I think Lee, Rajendra, anything else or any other topics that you want to discuss? About 5 minutes left.
No, I think I just wanted that Ruby version to be covered, and it's pretty much covered up. Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
No, I don't think so. I mean, on the positive side for me, obviously managing to get it to work in Windows 10 is great. And with the Ruby version change, again, I guess I was really fortunate. If I was still working with the Vagrant, I think I wouldn't have really known where to go, and I would have probably just been the VM and tried to spin up a new one, and hopefully that would have been happy days. But having manually installed RBM and 2.6.5, I knew exactly how to go and install 2.6.6, and doing that, it just worked. So it wasn't overly negative, the experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to hear. But yeah, we need to improve our communication. I'm not sure how to go about adding this, but I think in hindsight, what should have happened from the GDK side of things is that we should have raised, I believe I raised an issue to deal with it, but I probably should have raised an issue and tagged it P1, and then we should have a process in place where any issues tagged and labeled as P1 should be communicated both to the GDK Slack channel and to the Gitter rooms and on the forum, even though it's possible to subscribe to P1 issues as they're created, say for the GDK. But I think that we should have a process that at least improves the communication around when these things are happening, because yeah, they can be missed. And I think in a lot of cases the communication would have helped some people, but would prefer not to have to do those types of things, but I think it's important. You know, we make mistakes, so yeah, I don't know how everyone feels about that, but would that help, I think, in the future, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. As I say, I got lucky on this one, but certainly in other instances, I think rather than us searching out to find the answers, it'd be good if the answers kind of came to us beforehand, even if it was something that maybe didn't impact us. You're not talking about every other day, are you? So
hopefully not. Well, another one that's possible to disrupt is the moving to Postgres newer versions, like 12, for example. I think it came up because the latest Ubuntu stable, like if you just did a Docker run Ubuntu and didn't specify the latest, I think it's 20, I could be wrong, but the default Postgres that comes with that platform, or sorry, that version is 12, Postgres 12, and we're not, I don't believe I'm not even sure if on Mac, for example, if that's even available. So that has kind of been a discussion around how closely do we, you know, follow the latest stable. But I think the answer will ultimately come, or will come back to what the supported version is for the stable version of GitLab out there. But yeah, it's an interesting one when the standard version was really far ahead than we were expecting. So I think that caught a few people out, but yeah, that's another one we need to be mindful of communicating that one. So yeah, I think I'll create an issue and I'll CC you all on it and get some feedback around, you know, creating a process for communicating these types of things in the future to make sure at least the message is sent as wide as we can, just as a first start or first
I'm sure
improvement.
It's fixed now, but I know I had that issue towards the end of when I was using Vagrant, actually, that there were some commands that were being used in migration scripts that were no longer supporting version 9 or 10. I can't remember what it was. So the default Vagrant file for was Ubuntu was it Ubuntu 14 or 16 and running Postgres maybe 9 or 10, and that, you know, it come to a GDK update and it was failing, and looking into the command that was failing, it was a migration script, and then, you know, Google was telling me that command is only supported by, say, version 10 or 11. So hopefully that's all resolved now anyway.
Yeah, they are big challenges, those ones. In a lot of respects, I think a lot of those types of problems come from the disconnect between the way in which we package and deploy, say, you know, the GitLab stable packages like, you know, GitLab 13, and how we develop against it. So they are two completely different systems, and so there's a real disconnect between, you know, say in 13.1, we generally wouldn't deprecate or make something obsolete in a minor release, but say 14, for example, we might deprecate support for, say, Postgres 10. That would require sort of special changes to the GDK to have that reflected there. So there is a disconnect. I think we really do need to, you know, do something. I'm not sure exactly what, because it uses Chef, and that's another different set of challenges. But we do need to improve the ways in which we're both creating packages and deploying, and how we develop, which is, yeah, a really good vote for, say, the GCK, the Compose kit, because you could easily use the same Docker images that are in use for, you know, the stable. But I guess it depends on what you're wanting to do with the GDK or the GCK. Do you want to develop as close as possible to GitLab master, or just against stable? It's a question that keeps coming up. So maybe that's another question for the survey, actually.
I think it's primarily the age of the Vagrant file, to be honest, isn't it? I mean, as I say, I can't remember if it was using Ubuntu 14 or 16, but considering we're now on 20, I think that needs bumping, and that's the same, you know, the fact that image doesn't natively support Go 1.14, and God knows what other issues there are with it now. I think it's just time that, and in fact, I think the last VM that I span up, I actually tweaked the Vagrant file myself to use Bionic or whatever it was, the next version. So yeah, I know that Vagrant's going to have some focus at some point in the future, whether it's to just say, hey, use ASD instead, or or
yeah, yep. Yeah, maybe that's just a small fix in the Vagrant file. I haven't looked at it for a while to say, like, to be more specific on the tag that we use with the disk image. I can't remember. Maybe that could help.
Let me just have a quick look at the latest Vagrant file, because there were a number of issues. I know when I was last using it, the Go version I don't think was installed, so you had to manually do that. Yeah, I suspect it's still installing the wrong version of Postgres and the wrong version of Go, so I don't think anyone's going to be getting on very well with the Vagrant file at the moment.
Yep. It's definitely not a focus, unfortunately, at this stage, but yeah, hopefully we get some clarity in the survey around, we have a bunch of people using it, and that would then make it an easy justification to spend
Absolutely, yep.
Yep. Cool.
Well,
great stuff.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. We'll wrap it up for today, and we'll do this again in about a month.
Great stuff. Have a good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ash.